Right, we are kicking off here with chapter one, and we're going to do kind of an overall introduction of what HR is. I know for a lot of people this is their first HR class, and we're going to talk about what is the discipline of HR. Like any like any discipline or any course, a lot of it is kind of learning a new vernacular. So we're going to go through some of that, talk about the expectations of HR people, and the jobs that they hold, the certifications they hold, stuff like that. So the whole idea is kind of get an orientation for the field of HR. I've got this funky mic, which if I go back here, it tends to get a little soft. And then if I get up here, it gets crazy. So I'll try to keep it a little bit balanced. So kick it off. There's a guy named Jack Welch. He was CEO for General Electric for about 20 years. Kind of regarded as a pretty high-end CEO. He was able to withstand a lot of kind of economies going up and down. He has this quote from his book Winning. It says, "Elevate HR to a position of power and primacy in the organization, and make sure HR people have the special qualities to help managers build leaders and careers." So you can see like his implicit theory of what an HR person ought to be doing is helping managers build leaders and careers. And this is important kind of from the outset to get the idea that HR is a support function. The business can exist without HR, can exist without most ancillary services, right? You need operations, maybe marketing, and that's kind of about it to really do it. What HR does is makes the business work better. If it's a for-profit firm, makes it make more money. Takes a look at whatever the core competencies are of the firm, and overall partners with leaders to get it done. I think of it in terms of like the Seattle Seahawks, one of my favorite football teams. Okay, my favorite football team. If you don't like football, I'm really sorry. I better not tell me. They have a history of not having the best offensive line, and so what an HR person would do there, in theory, sorry, I'm adjusting volume here. What an HR person would do there, in theory, is basically say, what is the objective? What's the mission of the team? I'm assuming every year it's to win games, win the Super Bowl. So what are our strengths? Kind of do a SWOT analysis, right? What are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats? And it would be to get them a bigger, beefier, better offensive line. So Seattle can win games and play football without a great offensive line, but a good HR person would see that and go, hey, let's solve that problem. It's better for the whole organization. Moving on, he says the best HR types are pastors and parents in the same package. So you can kind of see his implicit theory. Okay, parents here, they discipline, they guide, they direct, they help. They're a support function. Pastor is supposed to be like a conscience, right, for the person. You can go to a pastor and say, well, here's where I'm at, here's the situation. In the same way, you should be able to walk into an HR person's office and say, here's where I'm at, here's the situation, and get some good sound advice. He also says this: the head of human resources at any company should be at least as important as the CFO. When he's describing this, if you're not familiar with for-profit organizations, usually you have the CEO and you have the CFO, and they are usually connected at the hip. A for-profit institution needs to make money, so it makes sense. The CEO is going to hang out with the person who tells them if they're making money. Jack Welch says, no, it's crazy. And he uses the analogy of a baseball team. He says, if you own a baseball team, who do you want to hang out with? You want to hang out with the accountant, or do you want to hang out with the general manager, the person who actually knows the players, knows what's going on in the dugout, knows the conversations, morale, stuff like that? So in a sense, that's one CEO's view of kind of what an HR person does. In terms of the tension, and there is tension, one of my favorite shows is it's The Office. If you haven't seen The Office, Steve Carell plays Michael Scott. It's pretty hilarious and sometimes inappropriate, but generally hilarious. And there's an HR guy there that the manager absolutely hates. The guy's name is Toby Flenderson. Sorry, it's just a lot of funny episodes. But there's always this tension, and they do a pretty good job of portraying it. Because an HR person, in a lot of ways, they say, look, we have rules and policies and guidelines, and assuming they're good, sometimes they're just, bureaucracy, you need to do away with them, and a good HR person will do that. But we have these things for fairness, for justice, for legal reasons. And so when a manager says, I've had this often as an HR person, or I'll get a call now, even though I'm a professor doing consulting, someone says, I want to fire this person. And I'll say, great, what's the story? Well, they've just, they're a bad performer year after year. Something's got to be done about it, so I want to fire them. I said, great. Have you told them that? I haven't told them I'm going to fire them yet. No. Have you told them they're a bad performer? Well, I think they know. That's not going to fly. It's not going to hold up in court. So an HR person says, sorry, boss, this is your company and I work for you, and you actually can fire me at any moment in terms of authority, but my job is to help the business as much as I can, and in this case, you firing that person puts a business at risk. And so there's always kind of this awkward tension, but it's fun. Sometimes people say, go into HR if you like people, because you can really help people. Don't do that. Go into HR if you're good with people. You can help people a lot. But when you lay somebody off because the whole company's going belly up after 20 years of service, and you tell them this is your last paycheck, it's really hard to just like people in that situation. You have to be good with them. A few other things you think of an HR person. You can read them. I'm not going to read them all. But in sum, it's a business partner. Again, HR is a service organization. It serves the overall business. Anyway, you can read them there. I'll move on. Definition. I like definitions, specifically if they're precise definitions. Definition of HR is this: designing formal systems in an organization to manage human talent for accomplishing organizational goals. So it's not hiring people or paying people or firing people. It's systems. You are a systems architect if you're working in HR. You build selection systems or redeployment systems or compensation systems. If you go down to a cell phone company, you go to Verizon or Sprint or T-Mobile, whoever, and say, there's something wrong with my phone, or if I have a question about my plan, inevitably they're going to try to sell you on something to upsell you. Well, that's because they have a compensation system designed by an HR person to advance the business interests, namely revenue. So their behavior is being driven by a system that some HR person actually designed. That's what I mean by designing systems. The context, of course, is an organization, for-profit, not-for-profit, doesn't matter, both. And it's about getting human talent streamlined, lined up to achieve organizational goals. We use some terms like there's a mission that the company has, there are strategies that the company will use to achieve that mission, and there are objectives within those strategies that tell us if the strategies are actually working, if we're working on the right things. So all that put together, think of an HR person as a designer of systems, not just a meter of people. How we do it here at Central, there's basically 3 levels of HR. I know some people here are HR minors, some are HR majors, some are going on to graduate school in HR. Some people are like, hey, I just got to have this class, no big deal. But I'll roll through them real quick. The graduate certificate in HR is really designed for people who they've graduated, and it's probably not with a specialization in HR, but they go, hey, that's actually really cool. It's a huge job area. Of course, you paid well, and placement rate's generally about 100%. So I mean, it's a great place to go get a good job in business, especially if you don't want to be just a number cruncher behind a desk. It's a fun career. So that's why this was established. It's got a series of courses. You got questions, you can ask me about it if you want to. But really, this is for the person who says, yep, I either want to grow in my current job in HR, or I want to just go ahead and get into that career. I got my undergraduate in whatever, something else, psychology, law and justice, rec and tourism, whatever, but they want to get into it. So you can ask about that if you have questions. From undergraduate perspective, this is our class right here. So what we're doing, it's the very first one, kind of laying the foundation for all the senior electives. You already know that most likely. If you are a major in HR and you've marched through, or you're marching through right now, some of the quantitative aspects of the business administration degree. And the last one, of course, is the HR minor. A lot of people take that where they have a major course of study, but they say, hey, some of my favorites is when someone is like they're a music major, they're talented, beautiful singer or clarinet, oboe, I mean whatever it is, theater, but they say I'm gonna have to work with people, hire, fire, and I want to run my own studio, whatever, so I want some management expertise. So a lot of people end up taking this minor as well. You can see the courses there. It's similar to the HR major with, of course, the exception of all the business administration classes. So enough of that. Let's get after it. Why do organizations need human resource management? In sum, In some, it's because people are crazy. Hiring people, sniffing out. People think, oh, I got a good gut, I can really read people. Yeah, okay. I've cleaned up a lot of those messes, as every HR person has. Um, so, so it's hard to find the right people with the right talent, right competencies at the right time, plug them into the right job, socialize them correctly, orient them correctly, give them performance management correctly, deal with unions, laws, federal oversight, state oversight, local oversight. It's complex to run a business, especially, well, not especially in the United States, but including the United States. So that's why an HR person comes in. I mean, there was several years ago, the Affordable Care Act was passed, and people were calling me as an HR professor, like, what do we do? Like we'll pay you anything. Come tell us how to do this. I'm like, man, I don't know. It's a 1,000-page document. We're still trying to figure it out. So as those government policies and laws change, it keeps HR people certainly on their toes and in demand, which is probably why there's always a great job outlook for HR people. Moving on, I mentioned some of these smaller organizations. I want to comment on this. I had a friend who's a mechanic, and he owned the business and hired another mechanic. And he said, James, I think I need an HR person. And I giggled and said, well, why is that? And he said, well, I'm starting to have some employee issues. No, you don't need a full-time HR person with 2 people. If you want, someone can come in and help you set up systems. But if you're an entrepreneur, you're doing that, you don't need a full-time HR person. The general rule of thumb is about 50. If you have anywhere between 50 and 100 people, there's enough kind of crazy stuff going on, absenteeism and turnover and state laws and hiring and firing, all that kind of stuff, that you're going to want an HR person to help you run it. But that's not at the smaller end. A couple of terminology terms that I want us to know. One of them is core competency. You can read the definition here: a unique capability that creates high value for a company. Basically, this company exists and it does X better than anybody else. What is X? If you can put your finger on that, that's a core competency. So when you're hiring for something in your core competency, or you're managing employees in that area, it's a little bit different. I'll give you an example at Google. Google does a great job. I think their mission is like organizing the world's information and making it universally accessible. It's pretty close to it. And their baby is programmers. That is their core competency. If you've been to the Googleplex, the kind of the headquarters, it's beautiful. Their landscapers of the Googleplex are not their core competency. So they're going to treat their engineers a little bit different because that's what they do best. Boeing is similar with their engineers. Goldman Sachs with their brokers. Everyone's going to have this unique thing that says, this is our baby. This is why we win against the competition. That's a core competency. Related to that, human capital, the collective value of capabilities, KSAs, that all of your employees have. So each hire that you bring in, you are hoping adds knowledge, skills, abilities, and capabilities that point directly to your core competency that makes you more competitive. Kind of macro level terms I want us to know. Speaking of macro level, this chart, I could stare at this for a long time, but give me a second to try to unpack it, and I'll try not to spend an hour on it. So on the outside, you can see out here in the purple, this is considered like the external environment. So you have a business, and you can drop it in the middle of Ethiopia, and that has a unique external environment. Or do you have a business, you can drop it in the middle of the tech sector in Seattle that has a unique business environment or context. So the outside around here are contextual variables, and they shift, right? Like tectonic plates, they shift, and it changes a lot of other things. Specifically, the 7 domains of HR. So I mentioned this earlier, when the Affordable Care Act gets passed, it changes how you hire. It changes how you give benefits, how you pay people. It changes your payroll and your budgeting. So when there's globalization, when you have new markets because of telecommunications infrastructure in Australia, well, that changes. Now, do we need to do expatriate hiring? Do we want to move into global markets? What does that mean for our human capital? What does it mean for our our leadership development, and our cultural orientation. So everything on the outside basically affects each of those 7 domains of HR, which you can see in the very middle is the HR functions. And so a lot of times if you're a good savvy HR person or just manager in general, it's kind of a side note, every manager, unless you're just managing a process or a piece of tech, every manager in effect is a human resource manager, because you have to manage humans, and in companies humans are resources in many ways. Sometimes they can be a pain, but usually they're resources. So basically if you're good at this, when you read the news, if you read the news, whatever that is, you're scrolling through, I don't know, Instagram, I don't care, whatever it is, and you see a movement in the external environment, you pause and you go, how might this affect us? Wars, rumors of wars, trade, currency manipulation, trade agreements between firms. A big thing a little while ago, the North American Free Trade Agreement was modified under Donald Trump's team to create what's called the USMCA. Well, that changed a lot of stuff when it came to HR. That wasn't just a blurb on CNN or Fox News, I mean, whatever it is you watch. Like, that's a big deal that has trickle-down effects for how an HR person does their work. So anyway, the bottom line is business exists in a context. When that context changes, for whatever reason, economies, doesn't matter, it's going to affect what lands on an HR person's desk. I was a simple example of that before we move on. I was an HR generalist at Boeing when 9/11 happened in the United States. And you can imagine, those were Boeing jets, and all of them got grounded, and we had to retrofit the cockpit doors. And I mean, it was kind of a big deal. It brought everything to a halt. It was out there in the external environment, and it landed right on my desk pretty quick.